Hello, this is Terry with Fortress Grand Corporation, and today we're going to talk about Time Limit Manager 10, Powerful Usage Management for Computers. Today we'll take a look at the Time Limit Manager features, how Time Limit Manager works, as well as how to get started with Time Limit Manager. We'll take a look at the features of Time Limit Manager first. Time Limit Manager essentially allows you to enforce time limits that promote the fair use of your public access computers. It can be set up in one of two ways. You can either have users be required to enter a PIN in order to start a session on a computer, or they can just walk up to the computer and press an I agree button, and then that I agree button will start the session. When they enter the PIN, they would press the I agree as well, and then that would start the session if you're going to require PIN access. And that's entirely up to you which method you want to use. One of the things that Time Limit Manager does that we'll see in a minute is that it allows you to display usage policy, and this is something that the user has to acknowledge before they can access the computer, and this is completely customizable. You can edit this in Microsoft Word, save it as an RTF file, and import it into Time Limit Manager so that it can be customized exactly to the usage policy that you have at your organization. Time Limit Manager also allows you to create usage reports where you can see individual session history. You can also see cumulative usage data, so you can see over a week or a month the total amount of time that computers were used. And you can also filter these reports by either the date, a pool, or the computer that the user may have been using. Time Limit Manager also provides powerful monitoring, which allows you to view remote screens on computers that are in use. And you can also send warning messages and also terminate the user's session if they're doing things that violate your usage policy. This also goes along with some of our user capabilities where you can have administrative users that can view remote screens, and then you can have other staff users that you prevent from seeing remote screens. So you don't have to allow all staff to be able to see the remote screens of users. You can disable that feature if you'd like. Time Limit Manager is easy for users because all they need to do is enter a session PIN. Again, that can be optional, and they just press the I agree button if you don't want to use the pins. After that, they just use the computer normally. There's a little clock that will be displayed at the top of the window that counts down their time, and also will give them 2 alerts when their session is nearing its end, alerting them that their session is about to expire and that they should save any work so they don't lose any data. TLM is also easy for staff to use because it allows them to simply print the tickets if you're using the ticket mode, and they can again view current sessions and view remote screens, and this can be done on a separate computer. Any kind of staff machine can be configured to allow this. You can also delegate the management so that if you want some staff to be able to print tickets but you don't want them to be able to change the amount of time people can use the computers or change the settings of Time Limit Manager, you can do that inside of the interface as well. And we'll see that in just a few minutes. The installation of Time Limit Manager is pretty straightforward. There are 3 main components. There's the TLM server and the administrative console, which is what you would install first. And then you have TLM clients that are installed, and that's the actual component that would go on your public access computers and display the available screen and the usage policy and require users to agree and possibly enter a PIN before starting a session. Time Limit Manager 10 supports Windows 10, Windows 8.1, and Windows 8, as well as Windows 7. And as with all of our software, we have free technical support, either via phone, email, or chat. So those are some of the features of Time Limit Manager. This diagram shows a little bit about how Time Limit Manager works and how the different components relate to each other. In the center of the diagram, you have the TLM server, and that's the first component you would install, and that would typically go on a server computer. It can go on just a regular workstation. The only caveat of that is that installing TLM server on a Windows 7 or Windows 8 or Windows 10 workstation is that Windows 7, 8, and 10 limit the number of connections, and that would limit the number of client computers that could connect to that TLM server, and that limit is around 10 to 15 for Windows 10, and it's a little bit less for Windows 8 and Windows 7. So the ideal mode would be to install the TLM server on an actual Windows server, and then you have above the TLM server, you have your administrative console, and that is the interface to working with the TLM server, and that can be installed on multiple computers, even though I've only shown it just on a single computer here. After you have your server and administrative console set up, then you would install the client, and I've shown that as Pool A and Pool B. And one of the nice things about TLM is that it lets you separate computers either by the function or their physical location into pools, and then you can have different usage policies and different amounts of time and different session properties for each computer in the pool. And so again, we've got some computers in Pool A on the left and Pool B on the right, and maybe Pool A is a children's lab where the sessions are only a half an hour long, and maybe Pool B is an adult lab where they have longer time to use the computer. And that's something that's easy to do with TLM Server, and we'll take a look at that in just a few minutes. This is an example of the available screen. You can see it just has the usage policy in the middle, the big word available at the top, so that as users walk in, they can quickly see which computers are available. And then this one is for ticket list, so it just has the I agree button. The user would walk up, press the I agree button, and that would start their session. If you're using the PIN access, the screen is mostly the same except for at the bottom where you have a space where you can enter your PIN and then press the I agree button. Once you've started your session, like I said, you use the computer as you normally would, and we just display a clock in the top center of the screen, and that counts down the time. The clock is small enough so that it shouldn't interfere with any programs that the users may be running. It can be moved around the screen, but if the user tries to close it or terminate it, it will just reappear. Time Limit Manager works off of what we call a schedule entry, and schedule entries apply to either a computer or a pool of computers or all computers, and then it's valid for either any time or specific times, and it's valid either any day or specific days of the week. So if you wanted to have different schedule entries set up for the weekend as opposed to the weekday, you can do that. If you wanted to have different schedule entries, maybe after school gets out, you wanted sessions to be shorter or longer, you can do that as well. And so you can set up as many schedule entries as you like and apply them to any combination of computers or days of the week or times during the day. Once you've said when the schedule is valid and which computers it applies to, then you say whether the computer is going to be available, how long a session is, whether or not users can have extra time, which is a concept that I believe is unique to TLM, where you can say that if there are other computers that are available, let the user have extra time on the computer until all of the other computers are in use, then their session will end. Again, you also have a usage policy that can vary for each one of the schedule entries, and then there is an interval you can set up that forces the computer to be idle for a certain period of time before another session can start. There is also an idle monitor, so that if you want to configure it where a user gets up and just walks away from the computer and doesn't end their session, maybe after 5 minutes or 10 minutes, it will end the session automatically and take it back to the available screen. So to get started with Time Limit Manager, you would just go to our website and you can download a fully functional 30-day evaluation, and you can install that again on Windows 10, Windows 8.1 or 8, and Windows 7. And at that point, then you would just go to the Start menu and access the Administrative Console. I have a couple of screenshots that show some of the customization you can do during the installation to select which components are going to be installed. This is the default. When you just run the installation and click Next and get to the Custom Setup screen, it defaults to installing the client runtime and the Administrative Console, which would be your client or public access computer installation. Notice that it will not install the TLM server by default. The first thing that you want to do, however, when you're installing Time Limit Manager is install your TLM server, and typically you would do this on a Windows Server machine, and on that machine you do not want the client runtime, so you would want to enable the TLM server and set it up so the client runtime is not installed on that computer. You can also have just an Administrative Console install only. This may be something you might want to do on your own computer or laptop where you don't have the client runtime or the server running on your laptop, but you have the Administrative Console so you can connect to the server and do the configuration without having to go to a staff PC or some other computer to do that configuration. And then finally, you do have the option of doing a complete install where you install the client runtime, the server, and the administrative console on the same machine. This is done sometimes in smaller libraries where there's only a handful of computers and there isn't a dedicated server. The only thing to be aware of in this scenario is that you want to make sure that the server is installed on a computer that is on first or turned on first so that the other computers can connect to it when users want to start sessions. So let's go ahead and take a look at the actual TLM interface. So what I've got is I'm running on Windows 10 here, and I've got the administrative console installed. I also have a Windows 7 virtual machine running, and this has TLM running on it, so you can see that it's at the available screen now with a pin. I'm going to go ahead and enter my pin and start a session. We'll go over how I actually generated these pins in just a second. So I click the I agree button, and that takes me to the desktop, and I've got auto login configured on this computer, so it automatically logs in and starts the clock running. If I go back to the administrative console now and look at my list of computers, I can see that that computer is in a session, and there's 20 minutes left because it's just started that session. If I refresh this window, it will update. The clients periodically check in with the server and let the server know what state it's in. And so in just a matter of a minute or two, it will let the computer know how much time is left for that session. I have several options while I'm in the computer list. I can use the camera, and that will actually get my screenshot so I can see exactly what's going on that computer. So there's the desktop. I could save this if the user had been doing something that was inappropriate or violated the usage policy. I can right-click and choose to save this as a bitmap, and if I needed to keep evidence or something like that. I can also send messages to the user from this window. I can do send a message and put in, let's say this is a test, and I have some options of sending it to a specific computer or all computers, and I can either display the message until they respond to it, or I can have it be a timed message so they have to see it for 30 seconds or 10 seconds or whatever I want. And then I have the option of changing their session, where I could either start closing their session and kicking them off, or terminating them immediately so that they're kicked off of the computer. I'm going to leave the session alone and just send the message. And so what that looks like on the client computer is it just shows up with the message and a button that says I agree. And then that message is displayed to the user. If I wanted to send another message and just have it time out, I can just go ahead and put in 10 seconds. And hit OK. And now they can't dismiss the message. They just have to wait until the time is expired before the message goes away. Now, inside of TLM, I can also, let me close this tab, in my computer list, let me refresh this, and we can see that it's been in that session for 1:54, and there's 18 minutes left. Again, the client will check in periodically and let the server know how much time is left. I can also configure auto logon if I'd like. I can right-click and do configure auto logon and set it up so it has the username and password, so that as soon as the user starts a session, TLM will automatically log the computer in so that it will just go to the desktop. And also from the computer list, that's where I can change whether or not the computer is going to be in pin mode or ticketless mode. And for this case, I've just got it set up in the pin mode where I have to enter a pin in order to start a session. If we go and look at the schedule entries, I have a single default schedule entry. This is what you would see if you just installed TLM. If I double click on this, it brings up the window where I can edit the properties of the schedule entry. You'll notice at the top that all of the options are grayed out because this is the default schedule entry. It applies all the time, anytime, every day of the week, and that's because there always needs to be some schedule entry that we can use. And what TLM does is it will only let you create unique schedule entries and not ones where there's any overlap, so that we don't have to worry about which one we should use. It'll let you know when you're configuring the schedule entries whether or not there's going to be a conflict with two schedule entries where we wouldn't know which one to use. This schedule entry is set to be available. You can make computers unavailable if you needed to reserve them for some reason, or you didn't want users to start a session maybe 15 minutes before the lab was going to close. You could make it unavailable so that they don't start just to get kicked off. Once I've made it available, I can set my session length, and this could be 60 minutes, 90 minutes, or 20 or 30. This option, the end session, even if other pool computers are available, controls that extra time. So if this option is unchecked, then if I was in a pool with 8 different computers in it and I'm the only person in that lab, I could have extra time beyond my 20 minutes to use the computer as long as there are other computers available. And that goes kind of to the core of what TLM was designed to do, was just to promote the fair usage of the computers in the lab. And this option allows you to say that if there are other computers that are available, I'm fine with somebody using more than 20 minutes on the computer because another patron could use a different one. If you want to enforce that they only get 20 minutes, then you would check this box so that it ends their session even if there are other computers available. What would happen in the case that somebody is in extra time is the clock, instead of having a timer countdown, it will say extra, and it basically pauses the clock and they are just waiting there in extra time until the last computer is used in that scenario where there's 8 computers. If 7 other people came in and sat down and started using the computer and I was in extra time, then I would be removed from extra time and I would have my 3 minutes of shutdown to save any work that I was doing and exit out of the computer. Okay, again, we have a usage policy that you can customize. We have a default one that's in there, but you can use the import usage policy and just import any rich text document. You could generate this in Word and import it into the usage policy window. The minimum time to wait between sessions is something that's used primarily with the ticketless mode, where there's just an I agree button. And a lot of times users will set this up to maybe be 30 seconds or a minute, so that when a session ends, it's at the available screen and it's very clear that the computer is available and somebody can't just start another session immediately by pressing the I agree button. And finally, a schedule entry allows you to set up idle time monitoring. As I said, you can set this up to be 15 minutes, and when the 15 minutes of idle activity is detected, it would automatically end the session and take the computer back to that available screen. The idle activity is determined by keyboard and mouse activity, so if there isn't any keyboard or mouse activity, then we would determine that the computer is idle. So I can also, that's the default schedule entry, and again, you can change the session length to whatever you prefer. I can also create new schedule entries, and maybe a schedule entry that specifically applies to this computer and only applies between 8 and 4:30 on weekdays. And maybe between 8 and 4:30 on weekdays, I want users to have 60 minutes. And so I can press OK. And one of the neat things with TLM is that it will take a look at the schedule entry and apply the schedule entry to that session. In this case, my computer is actually named FGC webinar, so I would want to change this. And now once I've changed it, you can see that the clock has changed so that there's now 52 minutes left. Essentially, TLM knows that the user has used 8 minutes of the session approximately, and now the session is an hour long instead of just the 20 minutes long, so the clock has been adjusted accordingly. And this lets you change the schedule entries kind of in real time and see the effects. So if I were to go and edit this schedule entry and make it 30 minutes long, the clock should go to around 22. And so that's kind of the behavior of TLM, is that there's communication between the server and the client to keep the clients and the server all updated as to what's going on. We'll jump over to the pools window, and this will let you see how you can create pools. Pools are really just a way of grouping computers together. So I can right click and add a new pool, and we'll just call this a children's computer, or the children's lab. And so now what I could do is go back to my computer list, and I could take a computer and click in the pool and add it to the children's lab. I should mention that when a computer is grayed out, that means that it hasn't checked in with the TLM server. This one, in fact, is offline. So now when I would turn this computer on, it would be associated with the children's lab. And what I can do is a couple of different things. I can go to the schedule entries and create a new schedule entry specifically for that pool of computers. And maybe all of the computers in the children's lab should have 30 minutes, and that should be, anytime and every day of the week. And so now we have that one set up for the computers that are in the children's lab. So we looked at the computer list and the computer pools and the schedule entries. The last main configuration area to look at are the reservations. And this is where you would generate the pins that can be used on the TLM clients. And you can right-click and add, and it'll bring up a wizard that will allow you to generate the pins. And you can create reservations either for a specific computer or just a pool of computers or all computers. And this is useful if you don't want pins being used on computers other than the ones that you intend for them to be used on. You can use this to narrow down exactly where a pin should be used. If the user were to take a pin, for, say, that was only for the children's lab and try and use that on a computer that wasn't in the children's lab pool, the user would receive a message that that pin is not set up to be used on that computer, and then it would let them know that they're not going to be able to start a session using that pin. I can say how many pins I want to generate. In this case, I'll just generate 10 and press next. I can put in my organization name here and also have the option of printing the pins. I'll go ahead and take a look at the print preview. This is what the pins look like when they're printed out. They're set up to be printed 8 on a page. You can export the layout if you don't want to use the default layout. What you can do after the pins are generated, I will go ahead and print them. You can select pins, right-click, and export them, and then you could print them using Excel if you wanted to print 40 on a page or something like that. So you do have the ability to customize how they're printed out through a third-party piece of software. So that's basically the configuration. From the user's end, they don't need to do anything different. If the user does a log off, that will end their session automatically. Also, if I were to hit the red X on the clock, it will ask me if I want to end my session. If I say yes, it will go ahead and log off the computer and go back to the available screen. At this case, I would be ready to start another session and log in with a pin. If the clock counts down, let me go ahead and log in one more time. And so I put in a pin, it's going to auto log in the computer, and I'm going to go ahead and edit the schedule entry so that I only have 5 minutes to use the computer so that we can see kind of what happens as a session nears the end. Oh, okay. All right. And I need to actually edit the right one. There we go. So now we're counting down, and so this will show what happens as the session starts to end. At 3 minutes, a pop-up message will come up and let the user know that their session is about to end. Another pop-up will come up with 1 minute left to go and let the user know that it's vital that they save and get ready for the computer, because what will happen when the session ends is TLM will forcibly log them off of the computer and close any running programs. And so if they were in the middle of editing a Word document or something like that, they wouldn't have the ability to save it or pause the logout from happening, so they would lose any work that they hadn't already saved. And so there are 2 messages that are displayed, again, one at 3 minutes to go and one with 1 minute to go. While we're waiting for that, we'll go ahead and take a look at the reports. There's 2 different reports you can see inside of TLM. One is the session history, and this one allows you to see each individual session. This is kind of like a transaction report, and so these are the different sessions that have run on the computer. I've just set up this installation recently, so there aren't a whole lot of sessions that are in here, but it does show me the computer where the session ran, what pool the computer was in, how much time was used, how long the session was, the date and time that the session started, and the reason why the session ended. Now we have our first message up here letting us know that the computer time is about to expire. Let me go ahead and close that, and we'll let it keep going so you can see the one that happens when 1 minute is left. The column on the right shows the usage, and basically it's a horizontal bar graph that shows in gray the total time that the user could have used the computer, and in blue the amount of time that they actually did use the computer. So this first session and the third session, the user didn't use it for very long. The second and fourth, they used it for the whole time, and these other ones, they've used it for part of the time. And so this just kind of gives you a quick representation of each session and how long the user used it. If I wanted to filter this, I could come over and select different options. If I only wanted to see the ones that were on the webinar virtual machine, I could uncheck the other computer and hit refresh, and now it shows me just those two. I could also filter it by the reason why the session ended. So if I was looking for specifically for ones where the administrator terminated the session, I can do that. I can also see the cumulative usage report. And so this shows for the date, the number of sessions, and this would combine all of the computers together, the total usage time, the total amount of time that was unused, and the average session length for all of the sessions. So this gives you the ability to see kind of average data over a certain time period. And you can filter this by pool or computer. So if I wanted to just see, again, the webinar computer, I can uncheck my other machine and hit refresh, and that shows me just the computers in the webinar VM. So those are the session history and usage reports that show you the information about how the computers are being used and how long users have been using their sessions. You can also delete history if you'd like. Generally, most customers do a kind of a monthly report, and then they sometimes will go back and delete data. You don't need to delete the data. That it doesn't take much to store the session history, but you do have that ability if you want to. All right, if we go back to our virtual machine, now we're under a minute, and so our time is just about up, and the clock changes to red and lets us know that our session is going to be ending. The clock will continue counting down, and then when the clock hits 0, that's when we'll be forcibly logged off, and any programs that we had open will be closed, and anything that we haven't saved will be lost. The last thing we'll talk about with Time Limit Manager is the Manage Users functionality, and this is where you can set up different staff users that have different abilities inside of the TLM Administrative Console. So if you wanted to make a user, maybe a staff user, you can press OK and create the staff user, and now you have the ability to control what they can do inside of the interface. If you don't want them to be able to edit any of the schedule entries, which is the default for non-administrative users, they only have view access. You can set that up. If you wanted to give them the ability to modify it, you would just select modify, and that lets them change the schedule entries. So you can go through any of these things and allow or deny any kind of privilege that you want. So if you don't want staff users to be able to see screenshots, you can do that as well. If you don't want them to be able to send message or terminate user sessions, you can do that as well. There's also the ability to bypass the available screen, and this one is actually fairly useful. If you had a user that was having trouble getting their PIN to work and you just wanted to be able to start a session for them without having to go and generate another PIN, one of the nice things you can do is just put in admin, or in this case, you could also do staff, and put in the password for the admin user. And this will allow you to bypass the available screen. And you have two options based on how you respond to this question. If you say that you'd like to use an administrative session, then it will start a session that has no clock running. This is something if you needed to install a new version of Office or antivirus software, something like that. You could start an administrative session that will have no clock and will not end until you log off. But the other thing that's useful is you can say, no, I don't want to start an administrative session, and this will just start a generic session as though the user had put in a valid PIN. So I'm back at my 5-minute session. So that's a handy feature for staff to be able to just start a session for someone and not have to worry if the PIN isn't working properly. So that is kind of an overview of Time Limit Manager and some of the features you can do with it. If you have any questions, you can feel free to contact us. You can either give us a call on our toll-free number and hit either option 1 for sales, if pricing and quotes, or hit option 2 for technical support. You can also email sales@FortressGrand or support@FortressGrand for more information, as well as do a chat online. In the upper right corner of our website, there's a chat button you can press that will connect you with a representative. So I appreciate your time today, and if you have any questions, definitely let us know, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you and have a great day.